Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And as always, I have a fantastic guest with me today. It's a very important topic. You might become a little bit triggered if you are just, take a few breaths. You might want to pause the recording and come back to it because it's a very, very important subject for us to talk about. His name is J.K. Emezi. He is a porn addiction recovery coach and the founder of the #1 pain addiction program called the Porn Reboot System, who struggled with his own addiction to online internet pornography for over 10 years after being exposed to it just at the tender young age of 8 years old and became addicted by the age of 14. After self-educating for many years and working with a variety of mentors and programs, J.K. overcame his addictive behavior. Today, he is a seven-figure entrepreneur and runs Elevated Recovery, an addiction recovery service, as well as the Porn Reboot Program and the Optimum You Program, which helps men become addicted to health and fitness, the Dating Reboot Program, and the Financial Reboot Program. JK, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It is an honor to talk to you and to see what you're doing now. I mean, my goodness, seven-figure entrepreneur and all of the businesses and the programs that you're running, that's just incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to get into this field or do all these things, but that's kind of where the universe led me. So
Mhm.
I'm just fortunate and grateful that I get to do something that I can go to bed with a clear conscience on at the end of every night, at the end of every day.
Mhm. And the fact that you're helping so many men along the way as well.
Definitely. Yes.
Mhm. So tell us how this whole thing began. What just blows my mind
Mm.
is that you were, you were, I guess, introduced, I guess, to porn, let's just say, put it that way, at the age of 8. I've talked to other people who've talked about, pornography and sex trafficking, and I'm shocked that it actually begins that young.
Yes. It does begin that young. I'm going to be 40 years old this year, and back then the way I got exposed was from physical pornography. So I was a latchkey kid, 80s, 90s, which meant for those of you who may not know that your parents were working, both parents were working. So when you came back home, you had to lock yourself in and not let strangers in. But we would have a family member who would come and check on us once in a while, and
Mhm.
she was a nanny of sorts. And she one day she brought this comic over, and she would keep reading it. And I loved comic books. I loved the illustrations, wanted to see what was happening, but she would never share it with me. So, being a voracious reader who had already read everything in our household, I was determined to get this, and I finally did. And it changed my life because the theme was pornographic in nature. Without triggering anyone, the theme was about infidelity. And it's so curious because the things we are exposed to as children, especially when we are exposed to something in a heightened emotional state,
Mhm.
it leaves an imprint in our mind. And there's something called the arousal templates. We are all attracted to different things. We all have different fantasies and preferences. Some of those things already genetically encoded in us, but others are developed over time from the people we are exposed to, the things we like, our movie, the first person we fell in love with on TV or in a book. All of these things contribute to our arousal template. And I didn't know all of this back then, but what I did know was that I was not supposed to be seeing that. I did know that this was what sex was. And that's another thing when it comes to pornography. The unlearned, the, mentally undeveloped, um, those who speak different languages,
Mhm.
every human being can decode what they're seeing. They may not understand what it is, but they understand that it's two human beings. They recognize the parts and they know something is happening, and they can replicate it in life. Right
Mhm.
or wrong doesn't matter. It's biological. And that's how we learn as human beings. And
Mhm.
so, even at 8 years old, having never been exposed to anything sexual and being very sheltered, I already knew what it was instinctively. And it
Mhm.
scared me because what I saw there was exaggerated. It was actually a comic book. So, it was even more exaggerated. And while I did not have the capacity to be aroused, Cheryl, at 8 years old, it did change my emotional states. In retrospect, there was a release of adrenaline. It was a shock. It was like something taboo.
Mhm.
And I did not know this, but when I went back to review my history as I worked through the trauma in later years, I came to realize that anytime I felt upset or felt rejected or felt sad as a child, I knew that there was something that would comfort me. For some
Mhm.
people, it was the imaginary friend that they spoke to, right? We all had coping strategies.
Mhm.
Well, for me, it was looking at nudity because that changed my state. And as a result, I continued doing that till I hit puberty. And then I learned how to masturbate. And as
Mhm.
soon as I could connect that feeling with this amazing thing that was orgasm, it was off to the races from there.
Mhm.
Anytime I had serious adversity in my life, I would fall back on pornography. And as soon as high speed internet pornography became available to me as an adult, then it was game over from there. I fell deeper into the addiction. And that's how it started.
Wow. And with the addiction, I was, of course, checking out your profile. You said that you're basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but almost like a victim, of the addiction. And, like it consumed you. You couldn't date, you couldn't hold a job. There were a lot of things that it was just basically taking over your life. Is that an accurate statement?
It absolutely is. You know, orgasm is it's so addictive, and I think it's also important when you think of the biology of that. Dopamine and a few of these other neurochemicals that are released are actually opioids, but they are endogenous opioids. We are
Mm-hmm.
the ones that create them. And the body is such an amazing thing. It creates opioids within you to help you deal with pain, right? A runner's
Mm-hmm.
high and so on. It's so that you can overcome your pain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the problem began when there's this technology that can force your body to continuously release all these different neurochemicals. You get addicted to it just as you would if you were injecting heroin or taking in some other substance. But that does have an impact on your life. It has a similar impact as injecting an external substance would, except that it takes a little bit more time. And
Mm-hmm.
because we can access pornography in the privacy of our homes, you can be sitting across the bus or train from someone and they could be viewing pornography. You would have no idea. The impact it has on our life is not seen till much later. And for some, it's never seen till they are in an intimate relationship
Mm-hmm.
many years down the line. Now, in terms of relationships, think about this. I'm 14 years old, 15, 16, 17 years old. And anytime I experience a strong emotion, like a lack of intimacy, or loneliness, stress, or anger, I don't have to talk to anybody. Why? Not because I don't want to, but because I know there is something I can go to that will release a feeling that is far superior to the connection I would get from somebody comforting me. So as
Mm-hmm.
time went on, the need to be in a relationship really wasn't there. And that's what's happening to a lot of people now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, a relationship would be cool, but only cool if there was sex in there. So, of course, if you're developing that way and you are prioritizing relationship because you're like, it's just another way for me to have the physical experience of pornography, then you're going to be missing many cues. And
Mm-hmm.
that is one of the reasons why a lot of young men today struggle when it comes to getting into relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't realize that there's something called intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
intimacy being closeness, emotional closeness. And they get very confused when a woman is not going to quote unquote give them sex
Mm-hmm.
because That's what they see it as. They see
Mhm.
sex as something you have to get, something you have to obtain. And of course, if you start looking at sex as something you have to get because of your exposure to pornography, the way you go about it becomes very different.
Mhm.
Getting sex means I have to give a resource for it in exchange. Getting sex means that it's just about the sex and not about the person. So it doesn't matter who, in more extreme case, who I get sex from. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter whether they're underage or overage. All I am or of the appropriate age, excuse me.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter whether it's consensual or not. Why? Because you're only thinking of getting. Pornography conditions us to view sex. We become spectators of
Mhm.
sex. We are not participants. We only participate in sex when we are viewing it. And when you're viewing two people having sex, there's one thing that's missing. That's intimacy. So over time, I lost the ability to
Mhm.
be intimate. My brain literally developed to lack intimacy, not with, I had intimacy with friends, with some friends,
Mhm.
with my family, but when sex was brought into the equation, I didn't quite know how sex and intimacy
Mhm.
worked. They were very separate things for me. And you can see how that would create a lot of problems for someone down the line.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, yeah, this like a sense of detachment
Mm,
and almost like dissociation that turning sex into a mechanical act that had absolutely no emotions and no feeling, associated with it.
absolutely. And let's not, some people sometimes listen to this and might go, well, how is that different from the way people have been historically? Let's make no mistake. Historically, most people have had the capacity to separate sex
Mhm.
from intimacy. And there's no rule that says sex must be intimate. We're
Mhm.
still biological creatures and we can still engage in sexual behavior just to fulfill the need. The
Mhm.
point I'm trying to make is that when we have something as pervasive as pornography with like one website, Pornhub for instance,
Mhm.
getting about 5 million viewers per hour, right? We have a very big problem, right? We have a big problem if 5 million people at any given hour are consuming this, then it's affecting us. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean it isn't an epidemic. It's
Mhm.
playing out in every major societal issue that is happening. It doesn't matter whether we're speaking about gender or we're
Mhm.
speaking about immigration or
Mhm.
anything we speak about as human beings is being impacted by this.
That was another point I was going to make, or a question, of how this is impacting our society. And, the fact that I think a lot of people don't understand how pervasive and ubiquitous pornography is. I mean, I was shocked when I found out, and how it is impacting our society as a whole, especially our young people. And again, I keep going back to the fact that you were so young, and I know a lot of other people who get exposed to pornography are very, very young. And where does this all start? Where is this coming from? I mean, there's got to be a purpose. I mean, somebody who's creating the sites, and there's definitely an outcome that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think the outcome might not be as insidious as people think. I think it all starts with capitalism. It's a business, and
Mhm.
people are going to make money by doing this. And with capitalism comes a certain amount of control, and
Mhm.
different parties become interested in this. If something is generating revenue, and it is based on people's habit patterns and behaviors, then you can also manipulate people's behaviors and perceptions. So, whenever there's a successful business and it's based on people's behaviors, and there are more complex parties at play, I think on the surface, we have these conversations, and it's nice to talk about the impact it's having. But understand that there are people and there are companies and there are individuals and movements who are very invested in taking large chunks of people and moving them towards a different direction. They're very
Mhm.
powerful individuals. And this isn't like, oh, I'm talking with my tin hat on. I think all of us now, if we're on the internet, we're smart enough to know that, okay, fine, this is happening. This is happening, and there are parties that are interested in it.
Mhm.
But um, with something like pornography, I think it begins with capitalism.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, while it started with people making money off advertising and so on, it's moved on to things like sex trafficking.
Mhm.
Now people are talking about that. Years ago, I and a few people who would talk about this, and people would say, "Oh, we were crazy." Like 5 years ago, I've been doing this for 12 years. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, no one would have anybody talking about pornography addiction on their podcast because it was crazy. And before that, no one was even talking about trafficking. Now everyone's talking about child trafficking, and everyone is up in arms. And I'll say something here to predict what's going to happen. There will be a time that people will be wondering how it became so how we started casually talking about people having sexually abusing children. I was going to say sex with children, but that's not a thing. It's always child sexual abuse.
Mhm.
But that is happening right now because
Mhm.
human trafficking is happening.
Mhm.
All these websites have cater to people who have these tastes, and most importantly, people's tastes escalate. And that's the biggest problem with pornography. And it's connected to your earlier question, Cheryl, on what's
Mhm.
driving this. Like, where does it come from? Human beings are designed to just with anything else, if something's good for us, we have a tendency to abuse it if we do not have if it makes us feel good.
Mhm.
Alcohol, drugs, and so on. Unfortunately, with pornography, in order to release the same amount of dopamine or any other endogenous opiate, you can't keep watching the same thing, which is
Mhm.
why there is no pornography today that is vanilla pornography with the music playing in the background, and it's not
Mhm.
love making anymore. We're
Mhm.
past that. It goes straight to the violent part. Well, why
Mhm.
violent? Because pornography, when you view it, it merges the parts of the brain that process violence and sex, which is a very primal part of our brain. We come from a long lineage of human beings who raped and pillaged, because when we engaged in that uncivilized
Mhm.
behavior, we went down to our most base instincts. Those parts of our brains have not yet evolved. It will be many, many thousands of years before they do. There's a reason why pornography is very violent today. But in order to release more dopamine, we have to watch increasingly taboo material. The more we watch this material, and if we are consuming it more than we are actually engaging in the act of sex or intimacy, well, that
Mhm.
becomes our preference. Men are
Mhm.
no longer aroused by just vanilla sex. They're no longer aroused by certain body types. They become very picky. Why?
Mhm.
Because you've conditioned yourself to view this. And the person who is running the porn website is incentivized. If he or she or they do not continue to up things according to your taste, well, you will not patronize their site anymore.
Mhm.
So they have to keep doing it. And because they are capitalist, they have to find a way to make money. And if what happens when a large amount of your market now only wants a certain type of pornography that is borderline illegal?
Mhm.
And what happens when you are a multi-billion-dollar industry that can lobby politicians to pass laws and change things so that your porn website can make those things possible? Well, you start handing out billions of dollars, a couple of tens of millions here and tens of millions here, and the senator will vote for this and vote for that. And next thing you know, we're all sitting around wondering, oh my God, I didn't know that this could happen in our schools. There's a lot of
Yeah.
complex things happening. That's all I'm saying. I hope I managed to piece together a rough map
You
of how
certainly
things
did.
work.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I did suspect, the part of what you were saying, I already kinda knew it, but not to the extent that I thought it through. And I do wanna ask you this because I know you're talking about men and men in pornography. D Do women get addicted too?
Absolutely, absolutely. The only reason that we focus on men is because I stay in my lane. When we started out, I was working with women, and the biggest difference between men and women is that in general, um, women's addiction to pornography comes with some other co-occurring disorder.
Mhm,
It may not necessarily be abuse. It could come with depression. It could come with some attachment disorder.
mhm,
And both of those things need to be addressed at the same
mhm,
time. So we have therapists on staff, but we're not classified as therapy. It's recovery
mhm,
coaching. So just
mhm,
in terms of being ethical, even though we have a lot of women reaching out, I
mhm,
always refer out our female clients. So if you're
mhm,
a woman who's listening to this and going like, wow, I have an out of control behavior with pornography, the resources that we offer work very, very well. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female for helping you get this behavior under control. But if you find that I'm also struggling with depression or a bipolar disorder or some other mental health issue, it may very well be connected to your sexual behavior as well.
mhm,
And again, generalizing women's sexual behaviors and how they change. Women's sexual behavior changes more frequently than men's, and it's a little bit more complex because of the way they process emotion and intimacy. And if we were to go deeper into it, and not to get woo-woo here, but women carry more in general. I have to use the word in general as a little disclaimer, a lot more historical sexual trauma compared to men because their history has been very different from men's. For
mhm,
men, it's a lot about getting, and for women, it's a lot about preserving,
mhm,
exploring, empowering, and so on. But
mhm,
that's a topic for another day. I could go off on that.
mhm. Okay, well, thank you for that explanation. And I wanted to go on a little bit of a tangent, just a little bit, because you did mention trafficking and sex trafficking,
Hmm.
and just wanted to share this with the listeners. I did a podcast, oh my gosh, several years ago of
Hmm.
a woman who was talking about trafficking and how to prevent it and pornography and all that kind of stuff. It was she's a therapist and that was her area of expertise. And I did not know this, but there's a very affluent community in Colorado, it's south of Denver. And this happened probably 2017, I'm not really sure, but 50% of the high school students were being trafficked.
Hmm.
And this would happen between the hours of like 3 o'clock when school went out or let out, and 6 o'clock when, it was dinner time. And this went on for probably a year before anybody even knew it. So when we think of trafficking, I think a lot of people think of, the white van pulls up and throws the woman in the car and drives off, and you never hear from it. But it's just so much more pervasive than we think it is sometimes.
So much more pervasive and so much more insidious. A few years ago, even while doing this, that would have shocked me. But I think there's
Mhm,
so many stories that have come out that show that this affects literally every level of society. The more affluent, educated you are, it does not preclude you from any sort of acting out behavior. And in our practice, it's evidence. In fact, I think there needs to be more help for individuals of affluence because they are the ones who are insulated from seeking help. They're also insulated from the what's the word for it? The repercussions of actually engaging in this behavior. Then they're
mhm,
also empowered to continue it because they don't feel like anyone's going to get them. And some of them operate in communities and organizations, just like anyone else. So human behavior is across the strata.
mhm, mhm.
That's
Geez,
really unfortunate to hear. It's actually, to be honest with you, it's a little bit sickening
yeah,
whenever I hear that um because it's happening in your community and it's
mhm,
happening with people you trust. And the crazy thing is people are like, we were just watching that on the news and we were having conversations about this stuff. And it was happening in your very own house, in your home.
right. Yeah, wow, that's so sad. So let me just ask you this. When did the light bulb go off for you? When did you decide that it was time you had to change your behavior? And What was your approach to doing it? Because I know that a lot of the traditional, as you said in your profile, 12-step programs, the traditional methods aren't necessarily that effective, especially when it comes to pornography addiction.
Absolutely. I think it was about the age of 17 was when I knew that it was out of control.
Mhm,
But again, I really had no desire, no strong desire to stop it. There was just a lot of guilt and shame. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s that um, I was now around people in college who were dating, who were having sex lives, and I started wondering if something was wrong with me.
mhm,
Because it's like maybe I'm unattractive, maybe there had to
mhm,
be something wrong.
mhm,
And I started trying to do what most people in college do. I would drink, I would go out, I'd go to the bars and clubs, and nothing happened. So getting sex, and I talk about this as getting because when you don't have access to something, you want to get that thing. And
mhm,
eventually when you go past the level of getting sex, it's like in the locker rooms, like, did you get some, bro? Did you get some? But when you get past getting and
mhm,
sex becomes accessible for you, as human beings, it becomes about doing, right? Oh, I did her so good. And then we start watching pornography because when we do something, we want to do it well. And I was still in that getting stage of things. And so I would do anything to get it, including coming back home tipsy, getting on websites and trying to meet up with people for anonymous sex. But I never did this just straight up after the club. I would come back and I would view pornography and I would edge. Edging means that you just view pornography and masturbate, but you
mhm,
don't actually orgasm because subconsciously you know that you're done. You want to keep
mhm,
that feeling going. You want to keep the high going, like most addicts. And so I started taking these short excursions out at like 2, 3 a.m. to try and meet people to have sex. Fortunately, I never got into a situation where I actually had sex. Um, and this is a very important point if you're a parent listening to this, because I was raised in a conservative family where I was disciplined physically. And I have no issue with that because I people have different feelings about that, but I
mhm,
know that when I was about to do things that would have got me put in prison or killed or any sort of, it would just kick in. It didn't matter how inebriated I was, it didn't
mhm,
matter how aroused I was. Immediately the thought would come up, I was not raised like this. What would your mother think? What would your
mhm,
father think? Like, can you imagine on the newspaper if this happened and this
mhm,
came out? Like the shame of that. And some people
mhm,
today think that's unhealthy, but I don't think you would think it's unhealthy if it saved your child's life. And
right.
that's really what kept bringing me back each time. But it didn't change the fact that I was constantly crossing the line. And one of these nights, I went out to meet somebody, and it turned out not to be an actual person. It turned out to be a group of people who wanted to rob me. And I ended up getting away because I didn't get out of my car. I put the car in drive. But without going into the details of that, I remember driving home, just squeezing the steering wheel of my vehicle, just saying to myself, JK, you weren't raised like this. You weren't raised like this, in shock. And that was the day I went home and I decided that I had a problem. I had a
Mhm,
problem and I needed to fix it. And so I just started the journey of seeking help.
mhm,
There's a lot of shame for anybody who's listening to this who has a loved one who's struggling with this, or if you're struggling with this on your own. There's a lot of shame, and that makes it very difficult to reach out to another person and admit that you have this problem. But I want to make it
mhm,
clear that if you don't do this at some point, if you don't admit it, your shame is going to bury you, because that is the outcome of shame. Shame makes us want to hide. Shame, if you think of any of the terms we use to describe
mhm,
shame, I just wish that the ground would open and swallow me. I just wanted to run back and hide because I was so ashamed. And that is a feeling that stays with us, it stays in your body. You
mhm,
want to hide, you do not want to be exposed to anyone. But the problem with pornography addiction and all sexual dysfunctions is that they thrive in
mhm,
secrecy. They need it to grow like a mushroom. They just need that dark, hidden place, and they
mhm,
grow and they become a part of you. So it's very important to begin that first step of just opening up and saying, hey, let's let some light in here. It's
Mhm.
uncomfortable, it's weird, maybe it's even painful. But that's
Mhm.
how you start leaving this behavior behind.
Well, 2 things I just wanted to mention. Number 1, kudos to your mom and dad for raising you right and, being disciplinarians.
Mm.
And the other thing was, oh my gosh, what was it? It was, that and oh, yeah. I mean, the that took an incredible amount of courage and self-awareness for a 17-year-old boy to be able to, connect the dots and say, "Okay, I've got a problem and I'm going to seek help." So, again, I wanted to give you accolades for that and congratulations.
Thank you. I do want to say that a lot of boys have the capacity to do that. I think
Mhm,
right now people are so distracted by information
mhm,
that it's just a different generation. I didn't
mhm,
have as many distractions. I had
mhm.
dial-up internet. It was like a family computer.
Oh, wow.
I didn't grow up in like an upper class, family where I
Mhm,
had the computer in my own room. But
mhm,
we get a lot of young people reaching out to us who we can't help legally because they're under the age of 18. But we had lots of 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds who have the self-awareness. They know they have a problem, um, but the issue is they are unable to speak to their parents about
mhm,
this. And I think every single parent needs to have not the sex talk, but the porn talk
mhm,
with their kids. I think it's way easier to have the porn talk because your kids are going to be exposed to pornography before they're exposed to sex. And if they're
mhm,
exposed to sex, they're also being exposed to somebody likely who's been exposed to pornography. And
mhm,
today, whether it's sex trafficking or some form of abuse or whatever the case may be, statistically speaking, pornography is a part of it. And if somebody is going to groom your child, going to be involved in something,
yep,
one of the easiest ways is to do so via pornography. So if you can have that conversation about pornography early on,
mhm,
just plant the seed and
mhm,
trust that your child's subconscious will take care of the rest.
mhm,
As long as they know what that is and they know that, hey, it's out there
mhm,
and it is not good for you and it's not necessary,
mhm.
you're safe. A
So
safe
when you
further.
say at an early age, I mean, I know everybody's different,
Yeah.
but what age would you kind of recommend that the talk doesn't have to be the full talk, but it could
Mhm.
even just be little snippets of, you might want to watch out for this or that, or just little things to start planting the seeds without scaring the heck out of the kid or yourself as a parent. Um, but just having that self-awareness and that education to help keep the child safe.
Yeah. Well,
How
first
would
of all,
you
this yeah,
go
this
ahead.
this isn't my area of expertise, but I will comment on it based on what I've seen. And I think today with sex trafficking and all the things that are happening, I think we have a generation of parents who are more aware and more protective of their children than ever. Like parents are speaking out more, and you hear more people saying, I would never leave my kids at somebody's place. I don't do sleepovers anymore because I don't
Mhm,
know who's going to come around. I don't know them. So when I was growing up, sleepovers were a thing. Now they're
mhm,
so much rarer.
mhm,
So I think as early as you start, when you start speaking to your kids about, I'll say this: if your child is going to have access to any electronic device that is connected to the internet and you feel your child is ready to be connected to the internet, then your child have to talk about pornography. So if your child is 5 years old and you're going to throw them an iPad and say, stop playing with Minecraft, you've got to have it, albeit you've got to have it in a language that they can understand that does not bring up shame. And that's the
mhm,
thing. Children are very perceptive. I remember
mhm,
when my mother wanted to talk to me about consent, and she didn't know how to do it. So I just
mhm,
thought the vibes were weird when she brought me into the living room. Some movie was playing, and there was like a light, like rape scene. It was super light. It wasn't like it was
mhm,
just like she was and the just cuts to another scene and she rewinds it and she's
mhm.
like, this is called rape and you never do that to a woman. And she was
Wow.
like, no, it's not good when you do that, right? The woman always had, and I was just like, where did this come from? I just want to go back and play with my toys. Super weird. And this, it just, the vibe was off. So
Mhm,
that stuck in my head. And I was like,
mhm,
okay, don't do that. I got the message, but the
mhm,
vibe was off. The
mhm,
vibe could have been different and it could have brought up shame. So I
mhm,
think, again, if they're old enough to use the internet, if you're willing to give them a device, or their school is going to give them a device. Apparently today, kids don't write anymore. It's all apps. Then you better have the conversation in a language that's appropriate for them.
mhm. Well, I have to give credit to my own mother who, had 5 daughters. I mean, I have 4
Ooh,
sisters. Yeah, you
not
can
easy.
imagine that. So, I mean, and she was just all over the talks, and everything. My father would be hiding somewhere in the basement or whatever, and she would do it. I mean,
Poor
God
guy.
bless that man. I can't believe he lived as long as he did, but, very, very open about talking
So
about
good.
things that were typically, taboo. And I mean, this was a long time ago, obviously. I'm a baby boomer.
Mm.
But and as far as being protected, whoa, yeah. And my father was a big man and Eastern European, so nobody really messed
Oh,
with us.
okay.
But we knew and we had the education, but nothing like it
So
is
good.
today. I mean, my goodness, it's kind of pretty scary.
It's very scary. It is
Hmm.
very scary. And anytime I need to be motivated about what we do, um, it just doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to motivate me because it's
Hmm.
always on the news. It's
Hmm.
always some of the most unspeakable things
Hmm.
that's happening. And don't you don't hear a real outcry about it.
Hmm.
Like, back in the day, there would be these movements and the government would mobilize and we'd be like, say no
Right.
to drugs. And the president would come out and they would have all these campaigns that did stuff.
Right.
And now it just seems like everyone is so busy fighting about other things that the most
Right.
important things that affect us at at the roots of the culture are just being ignored while we try to patch up little things. And I'm just
Hmm.
like, hey, if the values are gone, we're all
Yeah.
done for.
Well, the things that we really should be outraged about is this.
Absolutely.
And our number one priority should be protecting children.
Absolutely. And it's
S-
not happening.
I know it. No, it's almost like it's the opposite. Is that it's being sugar coated or it's covered up, or even that terrible story I told you about the community in Colorado. You really don't hear about those things
Actually, I never heard
anymore.
about that. I've made a mental note to check that out later.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
do check it out, and I'll give you the name of the town
Thank
after
you.
we log
Yeah.
off. But yeah, you just don't hear about that anymore. And even it was probably maybe 2 months ago. My husband and I went to a local brewery.
Hmm.
We don't do it all the time, but it's kind of a nice break to get out of the house. And when we walked in there, there was an older gentleman with a very young boy. And at first glance, it would be like, oh, maybe grandpa out with his grandson. And I swear, JK, the hair on the back of my neck just started to go up. And I pointed him out to my husband. I said, there's something very wrong with this situation. And he says, oh, really? Why? And I says, well, look at him and then look at the child. And it was like such a disconnect. And it was so obvious, but I was like, "Who do you call? Who do you call? What do you do?"
Yeah.
Of
Do you
course,
get
and
up and go talk to them and then everyone busts out their camera and they're just like, well, here's Cheryl being a Karen. And you're just like, I was just worried. And
right,
that dissuades people from protecting others because now when you protect others, everyone's camera comes out and they're just like,
right,
why are you getting in people's business?
right. Well, I will tell you that, I did give him the ninja stare
Okay.
for quite a while from across the room,
Mm,
and I made that man very uncomfortable
mm,
just by, and I have a look that says, "I know what you're doing, and I know what you look like."
yeah.
And you
And
could
if
see.
you have a problem with it, then you can come up here. And if you're innocent, you can be like, do we have a
Oh, yeah, I
problem?
mean,
Yeah. And then next
come
time,
and
yeah, I
talk
do
to
have a
me.
problem. Let's talk.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like
right.
that.
Yeah. So anyway, share some of your the programs that you run.
Mhm.
Just tell us a little bit more about that. You've got your elevated recovery and the pain reboot and I love the optimum I have a hard time saying that.
Yeah.
Optimum You program. which helps the men get addicted to health and fitness and wellness and working out
Absolutely.
as they're going through recovery. And the Dating Reboot Program, you're all about the reboot and the financial reboot. So tell us
Yeah.
about those programs a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, our flagship program is the Porn Reboot Program. And when I started doing this, I was helping men end their behavior with pornography. But I came to realize that it had to be holistic. And
Mm,
yeah, it was already a holistic program. But the more I educated myself, the more I came to realize that if a man was ending his behavior with pornography, but he also had an issue with food, he would quickly face that need for dopamine with eating in some cases, right?
mhm,
We had other men who would begin to end their behavior, but they would go through withdrawal symptoms because they couldn't be in front of the computer all the time. And then
mhm,
I had to show them that, hey, like incorporating exercise is going to make this happen for you. We would have men who would be viewing pornography, but then the question would come up, well, why would anybody be with me? Because they had a poor self-image. They didn't feel
mhm,
attractive. And because they never thought they were going to get into a relationship or felt the need for it, they'd let themselves go. So we would teach them how to dress better, lose weight, look a certain way, and feel more attractive and increase their self-esteem. And as we started doing this, I just realized that I would much rather have separate programs for them so that we could move men into these programs specifically if there was a need for it. So, for instance, we have a lot of young men right now who don't know how to date. And the fortunate thing is, I spent my entire 20s working on all these aspects of myself. I worked on my fitness, I worked on my dating life, I curated my look, I worked on my business, and I did these things in seasons. They didn't all happen at once. I
mhm,
was very intentional about, okay, when I'm done getting this certain type of body, I'm going to maintain it. I have to maintain it. It's not something I want to keep like do a 90-day challenge and lose weight. When
mhm,
it came to dating, I was dating with purpose. I was like,
mhm,
yes, I can date, but I'll get very distracted with sex. I'm dating so that I can find myself a partner and develop intimacy. And then when
mhm,
I'm there, I have stability so that I can focus on building a business. And I teach people it's so much easier to do that when you're not worried about sex on the side and you have a companion and somebody who can support you in other areas.
mhm,
So that's how all these programs came about. With the
mhm,
dating reboot, for instance, we have a lot of men who are confused about how to date.
mhm,
They're like, okay, cool. I think the way to do it is to get on the apps, but nothing's happening on the apps. Well, no one
mhm,
is telling these men that what is it like from the woman's perspective on a dating app? She's getting solicited by thousands of men who have zero sophistication. So, number one, you have to stand out. You have to understand that she doesn't view you as a real person because this is not
mhm,
natural. Number three, you have to not be dependent on the app. You have to also have the capacity to meet people in real life. For some guys, when they're younger, it might be meeting people at breweries, bars, and lounges, depending on their
mhm,
style. And a lot of people are like, that's not my vibe. I'm like,
mhm,
cool. Well, find yourself a hobby. For me, it was swing dancing. And I was just like, and that's where
mhm.
I took the woman that I've been with for the past 15 years, I took her to a swing dance class. And they were like, swing dance? I was like, yeah, I bet you didn't think I was a swing dancer. I don't look like that kind of guy. And they were like, yeah, we didn't know. I was like, but I love East Coast swing and Lindy Hop and West Coast swing. And it opened up a new dimension to me. So we have all these guys who start picking up hobbies and they're
Mhm,
meeting people through running, hiking,
mhm,
dancing, poetry, whatever you're into. And
mhm,
they also, it gets them out of their bubble of viewing
mhm,
pornography. So I think we're the only program out there that, when it comes to addictive behaviors, that has separate organizations for each area of Reboot Capital. And the one that isn't mentioned there is Financial
mhm,
Reboot Capital, where we work with a lot of individuals who have a deep desire to be financially free. They're like, oh my God, like I travel a lot. Our entire business is online and they see my lifestyle. I like being an example to I
mhm,
like leading from the front. So I show my life, I don't hide things. And you also need to do that if you're going to talk about this behavior. If you don't
Mhm.
tell your story, you just become a business, and it's not inspiring. You need to tell your story and raise people who end their behavior and
Mhm.
who also tell their story. And so things like the financial reboot gives people something to aspire to. I think
Mhm.
there's no point in ending this behavior if you now spend the next 20 years of your life struggling financially
Mhm.
and then wondering, which is what the 12-step programs do.
Right.
It's sure you can help someone and they joined you because you're free.
Mhm.
But if you can't give them advice on their financial status, they
Mhm.
still go back and act out. They still go back and drink and engage in that behavior because they feel there is no way out of this mortgage or debt. So if you can't help them and you can only give them a reference, I don't know. Personally, I'm just like, we can do it. I can hire the professionals. I don't teach all these programs. We have doctors and therapists and coaches doing all of this at Porn
Mhm.
Reboots. We provide all of that.
I love the holistic approach. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I'm not going to get the image, of you swing dancing out of my head for a while. I
Yeah, there's a video on my YouTube. It'll make it
Well,
easy for
as a dancer myself, any kind of dance form is just to me,
you.
it's the mother lode of fitness,
Love
health, and
it.
mental,
Love it.
well-being as well. So I have one question for you, JK.
Huh.
If you could go back in time, that 17-year-old boy, and if that 17-year-old boy could look into the future at the age of 40 and see what he would be creating, to see what he would be doing, to see how he would be helping so many people in so many ways, what would that boy have said?
If I could have seen all of these things,
Mhm.
well, first of all, I would not wish to see any of these things if I was 17 years old.
Mhm.
I really wouldn't, because at 17, I would not be able, I didn't have the self-image of
Mhm.
being able to do any of these things, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think it would have been, I think it would have been overwhelming,
Mhm.
right? I think it would have been affirming, but I think it would have been more overwhelming than anything else to have seen all of this. And Cheryl, I think at the end of the day, the beauty of this entire journey, it's not that for those of you listening to, it's like, yeah, he does all these things, seven-figure entrepreneur, helping people. The beauty of the thing is that I'm still human. And by human, I mean that I have my doubts, my fears. I sometimes question myself, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes I'm absolutely certain that I'm doing the right thing and we're going to make a huge impact. And sometimes I feel that we're a drop in the ocean. But it is those insecurities and uncertainties that make all of this happen. And it's this can't exist without sometimes not believing it can exist. And that's the
Mhm.
weird way you create things in the world. It comes from that. I don't want to get too woo-woo about it.
Mhm.
Um, but if you were to switch the question a little bit and ask if I would change anything, I actually would not.
Mhm. Well, your
All right,
explanation
I totally hijacked your question and just
you
did
did
my own thing with
not.
it.
You did not
I did my
hijack my
own thing
question.
with it.
But, a lot of your explanation actually came back down to the one thing, it's another point that, is on your in your profile, is the
Mm,
power of the brain and healing,
mm,
because you tapped into it in a way that was so powerful and effective, and it almost sounded like it was intuitive, that you had just figured it out on your own and found your own path, and that in itself is just really empowering.
absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up at first. And I know that's the only reason that we're on this podcast, because you yourself, we were chatting before this. You're an example in your life. And by the way, very inspiring, Cheryl. Gotta hand it to
Thank
you.
you.
You're an example in your life of what the brain can do. And
Mhm.
anybody who listens should remember that it your body, your everything comes from this amazing ability we have to change our brain and change the way we view the world. Every single circumstance that we deal with. I was telling Cheryl earlier on, those of you who not seeing this on video, a rhinoplasty. I had this surgery. And I remember the past week, I'm telling you now, but I was so uncomfortable because I'm not allowed to work out for 6 weeks. And
Oh.
I know that would kill you. Like you're a straight up ninja. You'd be like, what? And I was just like, well, can I do some light stretching? He's like, yeah, as long as your head doesn't go past your heart. So it's like,
Oh.
okay, the bunch of stretches I can already do right off the bat. But then sitting in front of the desk and standing up and waking up stiff in the morning, and I'm like 6 weeks. It's been 2 weeks and it feels like, but finally, during my meditation a few days ago, I realized I was like, this is not the way to do it. Sure, I can't move, but I should be fortunate that I can. And hopefully I'll be good to go in a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
But I'm making myself miserable simply because of the discomfort. And there are
Mhm.
so many ways not to be miserable, right? So whether you're dealing with an addictive behavior or it's an unwanted situation or it's something you don't know the way out of, the important thing is to understand that your brain is there to support you. Most of the time, it just starts with actually believing or just educating yourself a little bit to know that you can save yourself from this. And the truth is, you are the best expert at yourself. That's what we tell all our clients. Like, ultimately,
Mhm.
I'm the coach. I'm just here to guide you, but guide you to the point that you realize, like, you know what? Actually, I had all these resources here. Thank you for just showing me how to use them. And you're good to go.
Mhm. Excellent. Thank you. I was going to ask you if you had any like final pearls of wisdom, but that certainly covered it. So let the listeners know where they can find you, how they can connect with you, learn more about their programs, um, anything that you would want to promote.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm not going to promote any of my paid programs
Okay.
because um, we don't offer a service. We
Hmm.
offer compliance. And what does compliance means? It means that all our coaches are very much disciplinarians. If you are joining our program, understand that you have a behavior you could not control on your own.
Hmm.
And every part of you is going to try and run away, and every part of you is going to be filled with shame. And so we are a little tough and disciplined at the front end, very much like it would be if you joined a martial arts class.
Hmm.
And there are many things you have to earn, and some of you are not ready for that. So my recommendation is you check out our website at elevatedrecovery.org. Check out my podcast, the Porn Reboot podcast. It's on Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcast. And all I ask is that you educate yourself. And if you ever decide to reach out to anyone in our company, just realize it's going to be a safe, comfortable conversation. I
Hmm.
don't care what it is you feel you've done. I don't care whether you're so stuck in belief that no one can save me. And I don't care how much you hate yourself. All I can guarantee you is the person who picks up the phone or gets on Zoom on the other end has been through that and understands it. And there's no pressure. If you just want to get on the call and say, hey, this is my first time doing this, and I just wanted the experience of talking to someone and telling
Hmm.
them I have a problem with pornography, and I just
Hmm.
want to get off the phone after that, we're cool with that.
Hmm.
That's fine. Just do that. So visit our site, get comfortable with me, get
Hmm.
comfortable with our different coaches, use our free resources. We've got a lot of stuff. And when
Hmm.
you're ready, we'll be here. I'm not going anywhere.
Excellent. Thank you, JK, so much for being on the show. This has been an amazing conversation, and I really enjoyed talking to you. And you
It's been
have
my
given us
honor.
so much to think about.
Thank you for having me, Cheryl. I appreciate it.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you as well. Please do share this information with everybody you know. Share the episode. Do check out JK's website. What an important conversation to have. And the most important thing to remember is no matter what you're going through, that your mind, your brain, your body has an incredible capacity to heal. All you have to do is to find the right path. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.